Esto es Colombia 4.0. Ya haces parte de la era de la inteligencia artificial. Ponte cómodo y disfruta de todo lo que hemos preparado para ti.
Bueno, bienvenidos a todos nuevamente. A continuación tendremos la conferencia EPS and Videogames dictada por Scott Humphrey de Amber. Él tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en la industria de los videojuegos y actualmente es el director de producto principal de Amber. Los juegos más recientes de Amber son Tetris Beat para Apple Arcade, Secret Neighbor para Roblox y el próximo lanzamiento de Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle, Camps para PC y consolas. También ha lanzado títulos de alto rendimiento durante su tiempo en Electric Arts y también en Disney, incluyendo The Simpsons, Trap Out y Disney's Frozen Free Fall. Ha trabajado en la industria del cine y la televisión en proyectos como Lara Croft, Tomb Raider de Paramount y ha publicado trabajos que aparecen en PC Gamer y en IGN. Recibámoslo con un aplauso.
Thank you. Hola, me llamo Scott. Hablo un poquito de español, pero hablando en inglés, lo siento. Thank you for being patient. These guys are working hard on trying to get the technical stuff going, so how about a round of applause for the technical people? I don't know if anybody's thanked them yet, but I know that they're working really hard behind the scenes. Thank you guys and girls. So I'm Scott. I am a producer by trade. I've produced many games in my career. Currently, I am Chief Product Officer for a company called Amber. Amber is... Amber is a game development studio, and we get typically hired by other companies in order to build games. And so before coming to Amber, I worked at Disney, I worked at EA, and a company called Jamdat, and before that, I was a writer for video game magazines. And so the presentation that I'm going to talk to you about today is essentially leaning into my experience of working in brands, what is typically referred to as IP, intellectual property, in games. And basically, you know, the idea being that there's tons of games out there that are original, but there's tons of games out there that are based on brands that are coming to video games. And that's what we're going to talk about. Amber is an international company, so you know, I'm from Los Angeles. We have a big studio in Guadalajara, among other places. We don't have a studio in Colombia yet. But we would like to. We love Bogota, and so we would love to be here at some point. So the companies that we've worked for have big branded properties, and so most of the games we're working on are based on big brands. Like we've worked on Angry Birds, we've worked on Candy Crush, we've worked on a bunch of Disney brands like Frozen Free Fall, and so. There's a lot of things to be aware of and take into consideration when you're working on these types of games with partners like this. I don't know if anybody showed you this yet, so I'm just going to run through these pretty quick if they have, but the game market is huge right now, and so what percentage of this market is branded games? No one has really done that analysis yet, but you know, video games obviously is a massive market. These are 2022 numbers. You know, $100 billion business, $200 billion. You know, probably globally. Different territories show you. Whoa! This is moving fast. I don't know how to go back. There we go. Essentially, you can see how the territories break down. It's really interesting to note that, you know, the U.S. is not, North America in general is not the biggest territory. You know, Asia is a massive territory these days, obviously, because population. But, you know, there's still a pretty good distribution of revenue across the world in regards to video games as a business. All right. So what we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation is, I'm assuming that there's a lot of independent developers out there in the crowd. How do you guys stand out from the crowd in this gaming market? Well, I think today a good idea would be to think about maybe aligning yourself with a brand. And the reason is, transmedia is a massive business. Transmedia is essentially any media that transcends multiple different platforms, video games, movies, TV. And so you have an established install base when you go with a brand. You can have these conversations with brand owners. If you have a type of game that you want to make that you think would match a brand, you can have these conversations and see if they're willing to invest or maybe license out their property. Many publishers as well will have a brand already and look for developers to build those games. And so, especially on mobile in this market, it's important to think about this as maybe an option if you're trying to stand out from the crowd and have your game get noticed. I personally have worked on many brands over my career at EA and Disney. These are just a few of the integrated brand experiences that I've created, games-wise. And I can tell you that the majority of these games have seen a pretty massive lift in marketing purely because they are based on a brand that people understand. And so it's another benefit that you get when you're working on a game is, typically you don't have to spend as much on marketing because there's a massive install base. People are aware of it. Everybody knows The Simpsons, for instance. But there are some things to keep in mind, and what I'm going to tell you about are some of the pitfalls that you have to keep in mind when you're working on branded games. So let's talk about TV and movie branded games for a second. So I worked on a game called The Simpsons Tapped Out. You may be aware of it. It's a mobile game based on The Simpsons, where essentially you explore Springfield. And here's a trailer for that game.
Huh? Oh dear.
I'm outside. Where'd inside go? Why are you doing this to me? Because if I tap you 10 times in this game, I get free donuts. Are you saying I'm not real? I'm just a character in a game, and there are free donuts? Mm-hmm. Let's do this, giant me!
Download The Simpsons Tapped Out for free and tap Homer 10 times in a row. In addition to in-game donuts, you'll receive a special bonus decoration.
This game is life-ruiningly fun!
So this was a game that came out around 2016. And this was a game that was one of the first big branded IP games on mobile that was free to play. And it was, in fact, EA's first big foray into free to play. It could have gone really wrong for many reasons, but one of the reasons why it went well was because the game was created based on what people expected from the TV show. And if you've ever watched The Simpsons, you know that it's a city with characters, not only the family, but like being able to see those characters in the city and interact with that city and those characters is something that I would refer to as an aspirational connection for people that want to play a game. And so if you're thinking about making a branded game, you have to make sure that the type of game that you're making aligns with what the expectations are of that IP. And The Simpsons did a fantastic job of that because it essentially was a game where you explore Springfield, you can build buildings, you can interact with the characters, and then also we ended up getting the writers from the show to do all the dialogue. And so it almost felt like you were playing your own episode of The Simpsons, and since it was live service, it just went for years and years and years. The key to this is if you have a brand and you have gameplay, you have to make sure that the overlap has that aspirational connection. We call it player aspiration, which means when you play the game, you feel like it's matching what you think that brand should be. I'll give you some examples of games that have matched player aspiration and some games that have not matched player aspiration. and they're the same brand. So you'll see what happens in a scenario where games succeed at this and games fail at this. So Star Wars, everybody knows the brand, massive brand. 2 games came out around the same time based on Star Wars. One of them is Galaxy of Heroes. It's a game where you collect characters from Star Wars, make your team, and you fight another player that has their own team. And another game was sort of a single-player RPG where you played a new character that nobody had ever heard of before in a mission that was basically not tied to the movies in any way. One game had a massive aspirational connection, which was people that love Star Wars want to see the characters they're familiar with. They want to collect those characters. They want to play with those characters. The other was cool. It had an amazing story, but no characters that people recognize. And so one had 100 million downloads. The other, 10 million. Same brand, but people just were more into one than another because it better matched the gameplay aspirations. Pokemon, everybody's pretty familiar with this brand. All of you are aware of a massive game called Pokemon Go. That has an amazing aspirational connection where you run around the real world and collect Pokemon. Anybody that's watched Pokemon or played the video games knows that that's sort of the connection, right? You're going and trying to capture these creatures. And so being able to put that in the real world was a massive win for Niantic. They really tied the gameplay to the brand in a super cool way. There was also a game called Pokemon Shuffle, came out around the same time. It was a match 3 game. Turns out nobody really wants to play a match 3 game based on Pokemon because it doesn't match what you expect from the brand, right? Just simply putting a bunch of Pokemon characters on a board and trying to match them is not really what people expect from that. And so that game did not do very well either. Ooh. Sorry, I was moving a little fast. All right. Harry Potter. Another massive brand. Funny enough, if a gameplay mechanic works for one brand, it might not work for another brand. So Niantic, thought, look, we have this game called Pokemon Go. We should just find another brand and do that again. And they tried to do it with Harry Potter. The problem is, in Harry Potter, going around collecting creatures is not really what the brand's about. And so that game, even though it had pretty much the same gameplay as Pokemon Go with a different brand, failed. On the other hand, there's a company called Jam City that made a Harry Potter game called Hogwarts Mystery. And in that game, it was a narrative-based game where you see all the characters that you know and love, and you get to go through the story of being a student in Hogwarts. These are the type of things that people that know and love the brand want to do, and that game has been incredibly successful. And so this is just a reminder that when you're working on a game like this, if it's tied to a brand, make sure that the gameplay matches. One game that I worked on where I say the aspirational connection was great was Frozen. Again, a match 3, you normally wouldn't expect it to align well with a film property, but what we did in this game, which was pretty innovative, is we brought the characters into the screen, and the characters would interact with you while you were playing the game. While many games have done this recently, this was the first one that actually put characters on the screen that would interact with you while you played the game. And it turns out that was very, very good idea because when people go and see movies like this, they want to interact with the characters. They want to see the characters reacting to their gameplay. The other thing was Frozen was a primarily female audience. And if you know anything about match 3s, match 3s are primary female audience. And so the overlap of gameplay and the brand was pretty solid on this. This game was very successful, made Disney probably around $200 million. The other thing about a branded game, though, is that there's an opportunity to essentially use the properties that are coming out based on the brand to get boosts. And so, there's a game called Marvel Contest of Champions. You can really probably replace it with any other Marvel game. But they're super smart, Kabam was super smart, because every time a new Marvel movie came out, they would change the icon, they would put new characters in, and they would just get free marketing. Because basically the movie marketing was giving them a marketing halo. And so the other advantage of working on a branded game is not only will you get the benefit of marketing from the initial release, you might actually get a benefit for the entire product if that franchise or that IP has other things happening. Like if it's a TV show or if it's a movie series, whenever one of those new episodes comes out or a new movie comes out, you'll get a spike and people will download your game. All right, now, are brands always good? No. And so here's an example I'm going to give you of a time when a brand was not good for the game. So there's two games basically based on the same gameplay. One is called My Singing Monsters. The other is called My Muppet Show. And basically what happened was, very successful game called My Singing Monsters. We decided to go to this developer and say, hey, this mechanic feels like a great fit for this brand of the Muppets, right? Because it's basically about collecting monsters and they sing and you basically put on a show. Anybody that knows the Muppets knows that that's a pretty good connection because that's what the Muppet Show's about. They're performers and they put on shows and it's crazy and you want to collect them, right? Seemed like a good theory. Take one successful game, figure out a overlap of a brand that could make it more successful. At the same time, there was a movie, the first movie, kind of a reboot of the Muppets, was very successful at this time. There was a new movie which was right on the horizon and was getting good press. And this property, the Muppets, has been around since the 70s. So it really just had this, what we refer to as like brand equity, which is like the longer that a brand is in the marketplace, the more value it has typically, because just more people will know about it, right? And so like older brands like Star Wars or Marvel, things that have been around for many, many years, will tend to, Lord of the Rings, will tend to have a pretty big brand equity halo when you launch games, and we thought that would be a perfect fit because the Muppets has been around forever. However, here's a trailer of it, so you can see what we built. So again, collecting Muppets, putting them on stage seems like a pretty good fit. What we found is like the game KPIs, key performance indicators, were pretty great. I mean, for a mobile game, day one, like these are great numbers. You know, you want 2% conversion. It's a casual ARPDAU, which is average revenue per day DAU. But because it's free to play, you're expecting to get millions of users at a 2% conversion. And we thought the brand would give us those millions of users. So we were like, cool, everything's looking great. And then we started doing some marketing. And what we found was that we basically created creatives that we would try to get people to play the game on Facebook or Instagram. And we just copied the creatives that were working the best in the product that we were basing this on, My Singing Monsters. And so, like, if you look at the ads that were created for the Muppets, and you look at the ads that were created for My Singing Monsters, they were pretty much the same. Now, what we saw was that at the time, we were getting a pretty high CPI. I mean, this is actually a low CPI these days, but at the time, it was a high CPI. And we were wondering why, because like basically our ability to monetize wasn't quite at the level that it would make sense to spend that much on a user, when the source game actually had a lower CPI and had been out for about 6 months and had 6 million users. And so, in theory, the source game that had been out longer should have a higher CPI because more people have played it. It's going to be harder to acquire customers. And so we were really scratching our heads, like trying to figure out why a big brand that's been around for 50 years was performing worse in marketing than a game that had just been created and based on an original IP. And what we discovered was that not all brands are meant to be games. And so that's the other thing that you need to consider is that we found that the people that like the Muppets, through testing, don't overlap with video games. And so this would have been something that we probably should have done up front. We just didn't do it. because we thought it would be an awesome thing. But not every brand is going to overlap with your core audience. And so it's a really interesting case study because where you think something should have a massive amount of brand equity, this property actually had what we refer to as brand debt, which means if you bring the brand to the table, your game's going to perform worse than if you didn't. And so it's really important as you're thinking about like what brands I can make games for to make sure that you do some studies to ensure that the people that you think are going to play your game, that are into the property, whether it's a book or a movie or a TV or a toy, actually play games. Because it turns out that people like the Muppets don't play video games. All right, so I'm going to give you one more case study, which is a case study of a game we're working on right now. And this case study is basically trying to reinvent a classic IP for a new audience. And this is a common thing that we're getting asked to do these days because there are some really classic brands, whether they're video game brands or whether they're movie or TV brands, that people are trying to reinvigorate because Gen Z and Gen Alpha, which is the younger generation, are coming up, and they're going to be the majority of spenders in the next 20 years. And some of these old brands don't resonate with them because they don't know what they are, they haven't interacted with them. And so these companies, it's pretty vital for them to figure out a way to get their older brands to resonate with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because if they don't, all the people that know about their brands are going to die, right? And there's not going to be anybody left to buy their products. And so we're getting asked to solve this problem from a few different publishers on some IP, and this is one such problem. And so how do we approach this? Well, first thing is, like I said, Gen Z is a massive audience. By 2022, it's already 30% of the paying population. It's probably going to be 70% in the next 5 years. What we do is we're looking at an audience and we're trying to figure out how to match the audience with the game. And this works for any brand. It doesn't work just for reinventing a brand. Like, you should always go through this process. This is what we didn't do for the Muppets that we should have done that we do now because we've learned. But essentially we call it the triple diamond process, and it's a series of research, posing questions, going wide to talk to your users and do research, coming back down to make a thesis, doing some development on creative, testing that creative with the audience, and then executing against that vision of what you've learned from the audience, and then releasing it. And so we call it the triple diamond because it's sort of a combination of starting narrow with like a thesis, going wide to do research, and then at each stage of the triple diamond process, you kind of come back into the thesis and retest your assumptions. It could be a quadruple diamond, or it could be multiple diamonds, because what could happen is when you get to one stage, you realize that your assumptions are incorrect and you kind of have to go back and start over. But this is our creative process, and I'll show you some of the output for this creative process. And so doing research, we really try to figure out, okay, if we're making a game for Gen Z and we're trying to figure out how to reinvent a brand for Gen Z, what do we look at? We look at the games they play, we talk to them, we look at where they're spending their time, we look at what we think is cool, we interview them, we do surveys online. We really try to get our heads into who they are. I'm Gen X. I have some daughters that are Gen Z, but generally, I'm not in the headset of this generation, and so it's really important for us to do research and talk to them and really go to where they are and speak with them to understand what they want. And this is, I would say, any game you're working on, you should do this with your audience to make sure that the thing that you think you're creating for them is actually the right thing. And then what we do is we do some mapping based on their perception of games. We'll tie things to what they like, what they don't like, what they're into, and generally start to align on where maybe our gameplay mechanics might come from, or the type of game that we want to create might come from. And this is a really top-down approach to looking at game design. We're not just doing this. At the same time, we're doing a bottom-up approach where we have very talented, creative people thinking about cool ideas. And so, I'd say neither of those are mutually exclusive. You should do both. You should have a team that's passionate about the game they're creating, thinking of cool stuff, but you should be testing your assumptions on the market while you're doing that to ensure that you're not missing the boat. We'll do surveys. We find from Gen Z that, surprise, surprise, they're online more than any other generation. They're on their phones, they're on YouTube, they're on TikTok, they're on Fortnite. They're playing games online, and this is how they socialize. When I was younger, I didn't have the internet, and I would socialize in person. Like kids these days, they do socialize in person, but they're also texting each other. They're also online, and that's meaningful interaction for them, and that's how they do it. Some other things about gameplay that we learned is they use games as a form of socializing and relaxing and escaping the real world. I think this is something that transcends multiple generations. But the real reason for them to interact really is to connect with other friends or even other people in their generation. And then finally, as part of that multiplayer gameplay, they prefer co-opetition. We call it co-opetition. It's basically the combination of cooperative team-based play and competition. And so when we looked at what types of games they preferred, the majority of the games that they preferred were not just competitive, but games that you could play with your friends together and be competitive. And so that's actually a unique takeaway because it's not just PvP, it's team and co-op based PvP. And then finally, they're playing a long time. They're playing and sitting in sessions, and so they want things to do, and they want a lot of things to entertain them while they're in a gaming session. It's not so much like a single-player experience that you sit in and you kind of play through. It's more like you have to have things available for them that they can engage with, maybe acquire, maybe multiplayer features that you release over time. Live operations is something that we refer to as like the ongoing support of a game. Live operations is incredibly important for Gen Z and the games that they're playing because they expect when they get a game that it doesn't just end, that it keeps going and they can keep playing it for years to come. And that's actually good for the business because the best games in the market are doing that. Games like Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, all these games are taking a page from live operations and supporting their games over the long term. Okay, so then we basically come up with our hypothesis. We do all this research, and our hypothesis for this new game that we're creating is basically the digital mall. Gen Z, they like to hang out online. They like to go and play different games, but all those games are sort of connected in this metaverse that they're involved in. So, they may hang out on TikTok for 30 minutes, but then they'll go and play Roblox for 30 minutes, but then they'll go and play Fortnite for an hour. And so we came up with this theory, we call it the digital mall, because, again, as a Gen Xer, when I was younger, I used to go hang out at the mall, and that's how we would socialize. We literally would go hang out with friends, go to the Pizza Hut, or go to the clothing store, and we would wrap out, and that's how we would meet and hang out. These days, kids are using that concept the same way, but they're doing it digitally. And so it's not a Pizza Hut, it's Roblox. And, it's not a clothing store, it's TikTok, right? But the mall is still there. The mall is just sort of in the metaverse. And so in order for us to make a successful game, we figured that we would have to create a store for this digital mall, right? We want to create some place where these players can go and hang out and socialize as in part of this metaverse. And so for us, we started analyzing, well, what does that mean then? Well, there's gaming experiences, there's shopping experiences, there's social experiences, right? Back in the day, well, that's what's happening today in digital. And so what kind of experience do we need to figure out in order to have a storefront in this digital mall? And basically what we came up with is using these, which I think are super important if you're a game designer and you don't know about Quantic Foundry's psychometric pillars. This is super valuable, but basically what Quantic Foundry has done is they've divided all different player types into these 6 pillars, and these 6 pillars define what type of games those players play. And so whenever we're doing whenever we're doing a game, actually based on a brand or not, this is like one of the first things we try to align the audience on. Like, what type of game are we creating? What is that audience into? Are they into competition? Are they into creativity? Are they into narrative? Are they into social gameplay? And so all of these pillars basically kind of break down across all players what they could be interested in. And when you're making a game, it's best to have 2 of these that you're focused on, maybe 3 that are like your key pillars. Of course, games can have 2 pillars that they're super honed in on, and then others that are ancillary. But really, like, to give you focus when you're making a game, it's best to think about, okay, for this audience, we're going to make an action game and social, right, as an example. And if we're making an action game and it's social, all the features that we're designing for that game really need to resonate with players that like those things and are looking for that meaningful social and action-based gameplay. And so that's basically the assumption that we came to in doing the research, is that, you know, Gen Z, based on the games, based on their needs, based on what they're telling us, the type of things that we want to play, we should figure out, okay, if we're going to reinvent a brand to resonate with this audience, we should create something that has action gameplay, that's social, that you can come into and engage with over a long period of time, that supports live operations. So it's just not you come in and it's you know, gone. And so the game that we're working on is a game called Pac-Man Chomp Champs. And so basically the brand that we are being asked to reinvent is Pac-Man. Very old brand, very old gaming brand. And, you know, if you're Gen Z or Gen Alpha, you may know what that brand is because your parents talk about it, but you most likely haven't played a game like it. And so for us, we're like, all right, well, let's figure out how to take Pac-Man and create a social multiplayer experience using that brand that could resonate for a Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience. And that's exactly what we made. Pac-Man Chomp Champs is a battle royale, 64-player game. It's classic Pac-Man. You play it, but everybody has their own board. So there's 64 boards, and you can go into other boards, and you can take out other players, essentially. You can take them out by eating them directly, or you can take them out by doing power-ups that slow them down so they get eaten by the ghosts. And so it's a really fun concept because it's taking what everybody knows and loves about classic Pac-Man and bringing it into that action-based social multiplayer gameplay that could potentially resonate with a younger demographic. And so I have a trailer here that I'm going to show you, which walks through the gameplay.
Get ready to eat to compete. In this competitive eating battle royale.
You can customize your Pac-Man, you can customize your maze. So there's lots of things that you can engage in to actually give you some value beyond just the gameplay.
Eat dots, fruit, and even chomp other players' Pac-Man.
I think it's the first game where you can actually eat other Pac-Man as well, so it's pretty unique.
Grab a power item to mix up the action. Stand out from the pack with a plethora of costumes and accessories. And be the last pack standing to beat the Chomp Champs. Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle Chomp Champs. Coming early 2024.
Wins the award for shortest title of a Pac-Man game. Just kidding. So yeah. So some of the research that I've gone into here for you guys, I have available. If you want it, feel free to do a QR code. There's my email as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you ever have any questions or want to hit me up about any of this stuff, I'm always happy to help anybody out, so don't be afraid. Thank you very much. Questions? Volume? Okay. I can't hear anything yet. Oh, I can hear now. Hey.
Hello. I don't know if it might be a little bit off topic, but I really would like to know what kind of program languages do you use to develop the video games?
Yeah, no problem. So at Amber, we're a pretty big team. We're about 1,000 people around the world. And so there's pretty much not a platform that we don't tackle. If you're asking me, like, what are the priority platforms that we focus on, that people ask us to work on, the majority of them today are Unity and Unreal. And then, probably like after that, proprietary code bases or smaller code bases that are like not as important. I would say Roblox as a platform, it's Lua, it's a scripting language. Roblox, if you're going to work in that, that's a unique language, and there's opportunity to be had on Roblox. There's opportunity to be had in UEFN as well, which is the Unreal editor for Fortnite, which is it's not like you're coding in Unreal because there's a tool set, but it's its own editor basically. And so I would say today, like those are the 4 top languages. It's Unreal, Unity, Roblox, and UEFN that we're working in. The rest are sort of ancillary.
You mean Roblox?
Roblox.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you for this space. So, for the purpose of this question, I want to say that we own a very old IP, and we already have a community, like it's around 2,000 people.
Cool.
That community is very old, like around 20 to 30 years old.
Yeah.
So I want to ask for an advice. What would you do if you want to point this IP for a Gen Z community, or just maintaining the IP for this range of age?
Yeah, I mean, the key with IP is being relevant, right? And so you said your audience is like 22 to 23 years old right now on your IP. That's a great age demographic. Those are like the majority of people that are going to be spending, young adults, disposable income are going to be in that demographic. Now, I think you need to ask yourself, based on your IP, if you want to extend your audience, right? I think this is what you're trying to figure out, like, do we stick with that audience or do we go somewhere else? I think you obviously have to stick with the audience, but you can think about ways to either age down or age it up, right? Roblox, since we're talking about Roblox, is a great example of a brand that started with kids. Back in 2012, kids were playing it. These kids are now in their 20s, right? And Roblox has done a really good job of aging up their platform, now to the point where I think there's a stat, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I'm going to get close, which is like over 50% of their audience is over 17 now, which is a crazy statistic to think about. Like 5 years ago, it was like the majority of their users were 13. And so they've done a really job in figuring out how to take their core brand and their core user base and continue to age it up by adding features or things that resonate with that older audience. And so if you're looking to take your brand and make it resonate wider, you really need to think about what would be meaningful for an older audience, right? What would parents want, right? Like 22 and 23-year-olds typically aren't kids, but maybe there's something you can do with your brand that would resonate with parents, and then those parents would play whatever your game is, their brand, with their kids, and then you get an older audience playing it, but then you also get a younger audience playing it. That's just like an example of something that you can maybe think about to try to figure it out, but that's all the research that I showed you is like that. You should be doing that research. You should be talking to the people that you want to resonate with. You should be talking to your audience now. You should be putting ideas in front of them. Hey, do you think this is cool? Do you think this is cool? And really, that's the best way. And as you start to have those conversations with your audience, or the audience that you think you should have, they'll start to tell you the truth. Like they're never going to lie to you. They're always going to tell you the reality, and you'll learn a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Echo. Okay. Okay, so I have a question. So a thought that appeared on me during this is that, well, for example, so say there's the certain IPs and there's the company that announce them, so they license the IPs and all that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but like, is there some cases where the license, the IP holders are like very, very protective of their IPs, and they put a lot of restrictions and limitations at that. Can that sometimes be like conflicting? There's certain friction with the developers because there's a certain vision, but the IP holders don't want that or make a lot of changes. Or is that's an usual conflict, or how do you usually handle that?
Great question. Very insightful question. It happens all the time. Happens all the time where the IP owner is very protective of their IP, and they have a vision for what their IP should be. And the developer has to try to figure out how to work within those constraints. I've worked on some of the hardest IP to manage in the world. I've worked on Disney, I've worked on Marvel, I've worked on Star Wars. These brand owners are very protective of their IP because it's a billion-dollar business for them, right? If something releases and doesn't match well with what their audience is expecting, it's going to be a problem. And so, yeah, it happens all the time. The key is, if you're a developer, setting up the operational structure to keep those brand owners within your swim lanes that you need in order to be successful. If you leave it up to them, they're going to have you iterating, forever, right? You're going to blow out your budget. And so one of my best advice for you would be, if you're working on a brand, just make sure that you set the expectations out of the gate with the brand owner. Make sure they understand what the constraints are in regards to iteration time. Make sure they understand that, as a developer, we can't be working on this. We can't go through 10 iterations, so we're going to have to figure out a way, if it's a character that has to look a certain way, that we need to get there quickly, and maybe that brand owner has concept art that they can give you that'll help you get a head start. Things like that, that'll allow you to basically have more efficient communication. But yeah, I've worked on some branded games that are incredibly tough, where the brand owner doesn't align with what we think is best, and we have to figure out a collaboration, basically. How do we communicate what we think is best and sell them that we're the experts and this idea is going to make their brand resonate? And generally, that always aligns with, putting some of this data together, right? If you need to sell the brand owner on what's best for their brand in the game, the best way to do it is not through gut, it's through showing them data. Go test it. Say, hey, we want to build a first-person shooter based on Star Wars. And if Lucas says, we don't like that idea, go test it. Go find some people that like first-person shooters and go to Lucas and go, dude, we tested this, 90% of the people we tested say it's an awesome idea. They can't really argue with that. So getting to data, getting to operational plans that you can kind of get out of gut feeling and emotion is key for making that work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any more questions? Jack has a question.
Scott, thank you very much for that talk. That was incredibly insightful.
Yeah, no problem.
Good question. If you could work with any IP, what's your dream IP you could work with? Independent of Amber, yourself.
All right, this is a good question, but
maybe a bonus. What would the sort of game be?
All right, so I'm a big nerd. I love video games and movies and TV. I studied film in college because I wanted to work in film and TV, but eventually transitioned to video games. And so, for me, my favorite movie of all time, one of my favorite IPs of all time, is Evil Dead. And so, I would love to work on an Evil Dead game. And I know there's been some Evil Dead games. Some of them have been marginally successful. But that would be a dream of mine, to be able to work on that property. What type of game would I make? That's an interesting question, but I think with Evil Dead, it kind of prompts narrative-based horror, right? And so survival horror, probably something along the lines of a Resident Evil or Silent Hill, but maybe has a bit more action gameplay, comedy. It would be a really hard thing to get right. Comedy in games is super tough. Trying to find games that are funny, it's you can't really count them on one hand. So that's probably the property I would love to work on, and I dream of working on, and the type of game I would make. I'm really into horror movies and horror games as well, so I've never worked on one. I would love to work on one.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask, in your recent experience, what's the appetite from the IP holders for doing these kind of projects, but for PC and consoles in a position or versus mobile games?
Yeah, the reason I have mobile examples in here is because you know, a lot of the brands that I worked on back in the day were mobile, and some of the KPIs that I have are more accessible than PC and console stuff. But the Pac-Man game is a PC and console game. We're in submission right now on Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, PC. So brand owners these days are starting to kind of less focus on single platforms and are more thinking cross-platform. You know, if you look at what the successful games are doing today, you know, they're everywhere. You know, they're not just on one platform. And so I would say, like, you know, as an indie developer, a PC-first mindset is probably best if you're thinking about building games like this, with the opportunity to go cross-platform to console and mobile. The other thing that's important to think about is if you're working on a mobile game these days, because of Apple doing away with IDFA, which was the advertising identifier that allowed you to basically target people in marketing, you can't do that anymore. You can't do targeted marketing. Means that brands are now more important than ever on mobile. Because if you can't do targeted marketing, the only way that you're really going to be bringing a user base is by having that brand that people recognize. And so I would say, while publishers are looking at all platforms, the platform where brands are most needed today is mobile. The other thing, actually, another thing to know is Roblox and UEFN, brands are looking to come into that as well. And as an indie developer, those platforms are relatively lightweight and easy to learn. And advertisers and brands see those platforms like a TikTok. I mean, these platforms have more daily active users than some of these social channels as well. And so they really see these platforms like eyeballs, right? Like, they're not really trying to compete with TikTok. They just want to be on everywhere where the audience is playing. And so you can actually go to brand owners today, and probably some local ones as well, and make the pitch of saying, hey, let's take your brand to Roblox, we'll build you a game, and you'll get, you know, millions of users realizing that they can engage with your brand in an interactive space. UEFN as well. It's pretty lightweight. You can, if you're pretty good with Unreal and you understand the tool base, you can build a game really fast in a UEFN. Any other questions? No? We're good? All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good show.
Thank you, Scott. Muchas gracias a Scott Humphrey de Amber por esta conferencia y compartirnos sobre su trabajo. Ahora tendremos un receso para el almuerzo y los esperamos a las 2 de la tarde para el panel Working with AAA Games, Quality and Authenticity of Interactive Experience por parte